Silicon Slope Summit is Utah's original and longest-running grassroots tech event. It provides entrepreneurs, startups, and leaders the resources and community they need to succeed. With the pandemic behind us, we're excited to bring Silicon Slope Summit back to its original January dates in conjunction with the Sundance Film Festival. We have some unbelievable news. Silicon Slope Summit is free for all Utahns for the first time ever. You heard that right. Silicon Slope Summit is now free. For those looking for an upgraded experience, we are also offering VIP tickets for just $95. Thanks to our partners, sponsors, and government leaders, Silicon Slope Summit is the most accessible tech and startup event in the world. Summit will be hosted in multiple locations throughout the week in both Utah and Salt Lake Valley. There will also be a Startup Alley at Summit this year, where startups and entrepreneurs can meet with investors from around the world to pitch their ideas, receive feedback, and promote what they're building. Of course, we'll be bringing in world-class leaders and speakers, as we have in the past, but we'll also be hosting specific tracks and bringing attendees together for curated networking in a way never done before. You don't want to miss this year's summit. To register, buy VIP tickets, learn about sponsorship, and apply for your startup to be part of Startup Alley, go to siliconslopes.com/summit.
Well, thanks for coming on.
Appreciate you having me on. Yeah, it's a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Tell us about HEARE and the light in us and everything else.
Sure. Yeah. I'll start with the light in us because that was the one that came first in chronological order.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
It is?
It is. Yeah. Yeah. My wife and I started that a couple of years ago, and it began as just a platform, an organization, pretty low key, but the purpose of it was to gather people with intention to do some of the deeper work and to really go into those spaces where we connect, where we learn the deeper things, where we can open up and be vulnerable, where we can gain some valuable insights about, the stuff that matters the most. I think so much of our lives is caught up in the busyness, the routine, and the distractions. And there's very little space unless we intentionally create it for that deeper kind of community building, learning, growing. So that was sort of high level what that was about. And we started, my wife mostly was doing women's retreats, and I was doing some stuff with her for couples. And some of this stems back to my training in branding and design. That was my educational background. And we had our own experience of realizing kind of an epiphany moment of how powerful it is to apply the principles of branding to our own lives and to our own family. Because it's really about defining your purpose and knowing your core values and how you want to live and operate. And so that was like a big deal for us. And so we had created that, and I made a whole guide around helping other people do the same thing. So that was part of the work that we were doing with the light in us, right? With families and individuals. But over time, I started to get curious about what would a men's retreat look like. So I felt like at that time, and this was only a couple of years ago, and my awareness of this stuff was pretty limited, but I felt like I had heard of women's things out there like this. I hadn't heard a lot about men's things out there like this. And of course, there are a ton now that I'm aware of, but it just wasn't on my radar at the time, right? So I started to get curious about what would a men's gathering look like, a retreat look like. And as I was sort of mulling over this idea, my wife introduced me to a friend who does men's retreats. And he came over.
Oh, really?
And he said, I'm doing one this weekend. You got to come. And this was like a Tuesday. And I just remember my immediate reaction was like, whoa, I don't know if I'm like ready to just dive in like that. I'm thinking about hosting and facilitating, but to go and attend one, like I felt all this resistance, And so thankfully I decided to overcome the resistance of going to something like that. And I went to it and had a really powerful, amazing experience with that. And, the facilitator, his name's Brian Hurd. He's a friend of ours, and he's a realtor in the community here. And he runs a thing called the Evolution Project, which is the men's group and the men's work that he does. He was just really excited about the fact that I was thinking of doing the same kind of work as opposed to feeling threatened by it or like
Yeah, that's
competitive
cool.
or whatever.
That's super cool.
It was awesome. I mean, I love the way that he modeled that. And I can't remember if it was him that said, like, we need as many people doing this kind of work as possible. Like this is not something to feel scarcity around. Like we need to be doing this because it's literally saving lives and changing lives. And so with his, encouragement, I learned a lot from that. There were things that really resonated with me at his retreat. There were things that I was like, oh, that didn't feel quite as good for me. I don't know that I would integrate something like that or this or whatever. You just learn through experience, right?
Yeah.
And I put together a retreat agenda. I almost wrote the whole thing out word for word of like, here's what I would say to set this thing up. And then we'll do this thing. And I mapped it out. And then I just started to invite some friends that I thought would be open-minded to be the guinea pigs, like to try this kind of thing for the first time. And we ran through it. And there were some kinks, some things that didn't go super smoothly, but overall, I mean, it was incredible. It was such a powerful weekend experience. And to do that with a group of men where we went into some of those vulnerable spaces, we did some meditations. We did a breathwork meditation that was super powerful. Just a safe space to open up and talk about the real, like how are we really doing? What's really going on? There are just not that many opportunities in life to go to those kinds of places with a group of like-minded individuals who are there for the same reasons. And so we just saw immediately how impactful and how beneficial it was. And then I just went right on to the next one. And I just caught fire with it. I was like, I'm doing this. I mean, I did them, I think every month for the first year. And once a month I was doing a retreat. And then eventually I met my partners, John and Justin and Jason. And that's when we created the HEARE Brotherhood.
Yeah.
And so they were aware of the fact that I was doing these men's retreats under this other entity, I guess. So that's kind of where those connect.
So how do you curate these groups?
Meaning who comes to them?
Yeah.
So there is kind of a slightly different segment audience for each one. The one that we call the Light in Us is a little more skewed towards the religious. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or LDS, or Mormon, or many other labels.
Yeah.
Not unfamiliar to anyone in Utah probably who's listening to this, but that the Light in Us retreats are a little more centered on and geared towards an audience of members of that church.
Yeah.
And we do refer to its teachings and pull some quotes and things like that. And there's a lot of interesting crossover in the space of mindfulness and even healing and therapy and principles of the gospel that to me were just so profound. It really enhanced my appreciation for meditation when I learned how connected that is to some of the things that I hold to be very near and dear to my heart. And then suddenly looking in scripture, you see the word ponder everywhere and meditate. And it always precedes these really amazing, powerful, revelatory vision types of experiences. And so, wow, what does it look like to do a meditation practice with an intention like that? So it was kind of about creating those opportunities and experiences for people that maybe is a little outside of the typical way that we approach our worship or our spirituality. So it's not entirely about that, but that's like a big part of it, right? Deeper community, real conversations, strength and vulnerability. I think in some of our church communities, we feel like we have to have our guard up a little bit. It's not totally a safe space to be raw and open and vulnerable. And I can't tell you how many times after retreats, people will say, man, I wish my elders quorum was like this, or I wish my church community was like this. And for various reasons, it just is that way. But this is a space where we're all there for the same reason, right? We're there with that intention. And so it immediately creates a spirit, an environment where it feels like we can go to those places, those deeper places. Then the HEARE Brotherhood is open to all men, any religious background, any belief system. And that was very much intentional with the mission of the HEARE Brotherhood, which was to forge a global brotherhood of support and growth through wellness practices and transformational experiences. So there's the distinction.
Yeah. So have you heard of the Hallow app?
Hallow?
Yeah.
I don't know that I have.
It's like a meditation app that's based around I don't know what church or if it's part of a church or something
Okay.
like that, but
Kind of spiritually
it's
based.
about, it's like spiritual and things like
Okay.
that. It's pretty cool. I've used it.
Oh, cool. Okay.
I want to talk more about the Light in Us one.
Sure.
Was your intention the first time to make it, all about strengthening faith and all of that type of stuff, or did that come over time, or
Yeah.
how did you know that was needed?
Well, I think I knew it was needed because I needed it, right? Like we often with entrepreneurship, with problems that we seek to solve, it's because it's our own issue or our own problem or our own pain point that we seek to solve. I think that I had a great experience with my, relationship with my religion and spirituality and the church and all of that. But for sure, some ups and downs, and for sure, some times of stagnation, some times of feeling disconnected. And in those periods of disconnection, becoming more aware of the fact that like, wow, I am just looking to escape all the time, just to numb out, right? The first instinct, any moment of boredom or discomfort, it's grab that phone and look for something to, escape or to get a little hit of dopamine, right? I think so many of us are like dopamine addicted and we don't even realize it.
For sure.
Yeah. So becoming aware of some of these practices like meditation, and my wife's yoga certified. She did that many years ago when we lived out in New York City. She got yoga certified out there, and she would come home and be like, I just learned the most fascinating stuff. And she was looking at it also through this lens of her understanding of the gospel and of, the things that we believe in, right?
Yeah.
And so she had that filter on it and would see all these connection points and see all of these principles that were just profound, but kind of looking at it in a fresh way, from a new perspective. And suddenly there was this integration of principles from yoga and from mindfulness and meditation and spirituality and connecting with God. And so we started to, even when she practices yoga, she'll sometimes literally set up a practice to be a Christ-centered yoga practice.
That's cool.
Isn't that interesting? Right.
Yeah.
And so she's brought like some of her faith, her perspective into a tradition or a practice that I think resonates with a lot of people that maybe share a similar perspective. Right. So those were some of the things that initially tapped us into. There's some profound ways that we can enhance and deepen our spirituality that don't challenge or contradict, but just expand, right? And we found a lot of fulfillment in those practices. Of course, we're always kind of, checking like, okay, are we way off base here? Or does this still feel aligned with like what we really hold to be true? And so there's a little bit of that, navigating that as we experience and try things. But I'd say way back to when Aaron first started teaching yoga out in New York, those were some of the early seeds of what we do now. But once we got started with the Light in Us, we had a pretty clear vision of our purpose. And that's because we had defined it through that branding exercise I mentioned earlier. Yeah. And we did that when we were living in the Bay Area. That was kind of an amazing experience in and of itself, to sit down with my wife and go, what are we really all about? Like, what are the most important things in our lives? And let's write them out. And then let's compare papers and say, oh, wow, the top 3 of mine are the same top 3 as yours. Okay. And then when you think about, well, how are we living our lives in such a way that ensures that these things are getting the time and the attention and the energy that they deserve? Because we're claiming here that they're the most important, but are we living in a way that reflects that? And then we went down through our guiding principles, like how do we want to navigate life, which is kind of like the how. So we started with the what, which is the core values. And we both had family top of the list, faith top of the list, some shared things. And then where they diverged, it was like, oh, okay, cool. I can support you in that and you can support me in mine. And we're just more aware of each other's needs, priorities, you know. Then we went through the how do we want to live? What are some of these core truths that we live by, that we want to be a part of our marriage, a part of our family, our culture? This family culture came up a lot during this exercise because family culture happens organically or intentionally, and often a mix of both, right? But this exercise was a way for us to get really clear on what kind of culture we wanted to nourish in our family. And so we involved our kids in this process too, by the way. Like, we did it individually. We came up with a bunch of stuff. We shared with our kids and said, what do you guys think of this? And what are your ideas? And I mean, one of our little boy at the time was like 7 or 8, and he came up with one of our guiding principles, which was curiosity leads to discovery. I was like, where did that come from? Like, just this moment of brilliance from our little boy. And we were like, put it on the list, And so we have this thing printed out on our wall that's like our family crest and our values and our guiding principles, and then our purpose statement, which is our why. And so defining our why, it was already set in place. And then years later, we established this thing called the light in us, and we already knew the purpose and the intention because we had done that work prior to this thing even existing.
So how long do these retreats last?
We have a couple of, usually it's like an overnight. So the men's retreats that I do, it's like a Friday night. We show up, we do some work Friday night. We start to open up hearts and minds and start to dig in. And then we spend most of the day Saturday doing some of the deeper work. That's usually when we do the breathwork meditation. We do something that we've come to call transformation labs, which are really powerful. And also it's not all just deep, intense stuff. I mean, we go and do a hike or go to the Midway crater and do a crater swim in that cool, geothermal water there. So we've gone ziplining before. There's a little bit of element of like, let's get out and move our bodies and, be active. But those ones are just about 24 hours is all. And it's incredible what you can do in that amount of time. And one of the reasons I wanted it to be pretty succinct like that was just to make it as accessible as possible to, the audience are usually busy, young professionals or middle-aged professionals or whatever that have families, that have kids, and to leave for several days at a time is just a big ask, just time-wise, let alone, if the investment that would be required or whatever. But that was another component. I wanted it to be super affordable. And so I kept it really attainable, both time, financial. It's like, just get here and let's do this work. The HEARE Brotherhood retreats have extended to be a little bit longer. So they're usually 2 to 3 days instead of 1 to 2 days. So
where do you go? Like, where are they? Outdoors, the indoors, mix?
Yeah, it's kind of a mix. So the Light in Us retreats that I do are in Midway. We have a little property there right by the homestead. Beautiful little kind of rundown, but amazing, lots of character and charm home there. And there's a little pond in front of it with some koi fish in there. And it has that geothermal spring that feeds the Midway crater. It also feeds into that pond a little bit, so it never freezes over in the winter. And so the koi fish are there year round. And there's a little bridge that goes across. And that's kind of the transition from where you were to this set apart space, right? You cross that bridge and you enter into a set apart space, and that's where the work happens. So that's really cool. So that's where we do the smaller men's retreats. The HEARE Brotherhood retreats, we've done them in different states and different locations. We did one in Idaho up at a ranch, Jason Rogers' place, who's one of our co-founders. We did one down at the Zion Wildflower last year, which is that glamping, amazing site that Tony Nelson runs. Or he's the managing operator. I forget exactly. Anyway, Tony's a part of that. Yeah. We did a kind of like a Bible camp site in Payson, Arizona. And then our most recent retreat, which was back in July, was in Oahu, Hawaii. And so we found this incredible property right at the foot of these beautiful, lush green mountains. And they had about 5 or 6 yurts on the property. So we just found that place, talked to the owners, rented it out for the weekend. And it's run by a nonprofit, and they're very big on protecting that land. And it's this sacred land, It was amazing. So yeah, we've done a few different states now. Our next one coming up is back at the Zion Wildflower in early November. And so we've arranged that with Tony again, and we're excited for that. And we've talked about Mexico City, which
oh, cool.
Yeah, which is kind of a collaboration with Scott Porter, who does those taco tours. You may have be familiar with. Yeah. So there's talk of, going international even, but I mean, even just the fact that we've done them in all those different states is kind of amazing to sit here and reflect back on that and be like, yeah, we've done that and it's worked. And they've been incredible, incredible retreats. Like the guys that show up and the work that they do and the camaraderie and the brotherhood that is experienced there, it is unlike anything that I've experienced before.
That's cool. Yeah, it's actually incredible. What challenges have you had as you've built this?
Yeah. So with the HEARE Brotherhood, for sure, we've had some challenges with just I think probably one of the biggest challenges that we ran into, we were building an online community as well as doing these physical in-person experiences. And retreats is just one of the things, right? We do smaller gatherings. We do breathwork meditations on occasion. We've done cold plunges and hikes and festival type of things, just day-long things and partnerships with other groups. It's been awesome. The online community has been kind of a harder one to figure out how to maintain, like create that kind of space and maintain it. There have been parts of it that have been really successful and really incredible, like components of that online community. There have been other parts where it feels like we're kind of missing the point, or how do we manage this better? We went through a phase of hypergrowth with the online community when we tested some advertising, and just this enormous influx of people joined in
that shows you the need.
Yeah, it did. It also showed us that we didn't do a very careful job of selection of who gets to come in, right? So we had a lot of people come in for ulterior motives or the wrong reasons or whatever. And then suddenly if one or two people even are in there saying things that just feel like are missing the mark, the whole space suddenly feels that, it's like this idea of creating safe spaces, it's pretty delicate. And if you get people in there maybe trying to take advantage of the space or self-promoting or thinking, there's some people here that I can take advantage of or whatever it is, right? Like suddenly the whole, it does. Yeah. I mean,
it only takes like one or two too.
Exactly. Yeah. So we felt that big time when we sort of opened up the doors and said, hey, like we want to make this accessible to everybody who feels called to this. And never mind that we have this oath that we require you to sign to join, and that we have these filtering questions, and it's just easy to blow past that if you don't care, right? Or if you're there for another reason. And so we felt this kind of like almost corruption of the safe space that we had created, and it was heartbreaking. That was probably one of the biggest challenges that we felt in the online community. And it took a while to recover from that. We lost a lot of members during that time because they were like, oh, this isn't.
Of your like hardcore members.
Some of them, yeah. And then we had a lot that were, we have a lot of members that are on the app and they go in and they look at it and they read things, but they don't really comment or participate. And some of them fell away from the space too, right? And so that was pretty heartbreaking. And we had to make some decisions at the time of, okay, we got to shut off this function. We turned off the direct messaging feature because people were saying, hey, I'm getting hit up by people asking for money or for weird stuff or whatever. It's like, you can only imagine the kinds of things that, that would emerge. And so we had to like shut some things down for a while. And then of course there's the backlash of the core community that's like, hey, why are you doing this? And so that was like a stressful time.
What did you build this platform yourself?
No, we used Mighty Networks. It's
okay. Yeah.
Familiar with that one? Yeah. So we used Mighty Networks. We made a significant initial investment to make it our own standalone app. And unfortunately that lasted us for a year. When it came time to renew that, we were just like, we can't quite justify the expense again. And so we're now on a more basic kind of plan with them. So it continues to exist. It just doesn't have all the same bells and whistles that it used to. But really those things were not core. They weren't essential. So we're kind of like, no, this is okay. And we've been exploring alternatives as well. Like how else might we keep this community connected and do the meaningful work in an online space, but without having to so heavily like monitor it. And, none of us want to be online community managers all the time. And it felt like that back when we had that hypergrowth stage. Like I felt like that was my full-time job for a while and I was not happy with that job. And so we backed off of that a little bit. We kind of, let go of a little bit of the control of, we have to,
Yeah.
control everything that's happening here. Of course, we had to take some more extreme measures at the time, but we intentionally, we turned those ads off. The growth slowed down, but there was a good number of community members in there, and we were like, let's just see if this organically continues to grow and if we can get back on track with what the purpose is. And we've seen that, there's hardly any issues that like what we saw during that time now. And that was, several months ago. But so there's been a bit of a correction there. But then other challenges that have come up is just, probably the biggest challenge of any kind of entrepreneurial endeavor is like, how do we make this sustainable? And whether this thing was for profit or a nonprofit, we just debated back and forth and had different ideas and visions of what it would be or how to sustain it. And just over the process of time, we got to the point where we were wanting it to be a for-profit organization, but we were acting like it was a nonprofit. But we weren't doing all the fundraising and things that a nonprofit has to do, right? And so we were in this kind of awkward place of in between. And it got to the point where some of a couple of my partners were kind of going all in on this. Like, let's make this work. One of them was actually let go from a job. And so he was like, I'm all in on here. Let's figure this out. And it put this pressure on us to like figure out the sustainability, the monetization component, even though none of us were in this to try to make it a profitable company. Yeah. I mean, it was just like, it was so mission driven. It felt just very pure in that way, but that doesn't mean there can't be, in fact, there needs to be
you gotta fund it.
Yeah. The sustainability, the financial component. And so we had kind of neglected the financial part most of the time. We were just excited about doing the work, getting these retreats going, getting the online community going. And there came a point where a couple of my partners who were putting a lot of energy into this, they were reaching kind of the end of their line financially for supporting their families and whatnot. And we still hadn't figured out the way to sustain this financially, right? And so they had to jump back into full-time work. And a little bit of the momentum was lost when that transition happened. And we continued to test things and try things and explore things. And that's just been a hard part to figure out, like, how do you take something that feels so mission driven and figure out that way to sustain it. But none of us really dove into the like, let's just go the nonprofit route. I think in hindsight, that probably was the right decision, but none of us felt so called to like go after that. We were just more focused on doing the work itself. And so
it's like just an LLC currently.
Yeah. Well, we started it as an LLC, and then we converted that into a corporation. I forget if it's a C Corp. And then we opened a nonprofit arm because we were like, let's figure this out. And we were just building the ship as we're sailing along. So
that's the right way.
Yeah. So
how do you make money?
So we've had a couple of different approaches, and one was a subscription model, which initially the offering just wasn't resonating with new members. There were a lot of people already in the community that said, "Oh, cool! Like, we'd love to support this." And so they started to pay a subscription just for access to the community, discount on the retreats, and the apparel was another part of it, right? That was kind of you
had great apparel.
Yeah, that was kind of the original thesis for the whole brand, and that came from John Moore. He had this vision for a clothing brand that when you're wearing this apparel, it means like, hey, I'm a safe space. Like I'm here to hear, right? I'm here for you. I'm here to listen. And it was just a nonverbal way to say, hey, I've got you. This idea of the HEARE oath that is, I vow to be my brother's keeper, and we had that language on some of the apparel, like, I am my brother's keeper, right? And so, yeah, that's a one way in which we had a little bit of income. Still, there's the upfront costs and everything that goes into apparel, and people who are in that industry know that it's a lot of work for that to all become sustainable and successful. So we had, one arm in that. We had one in the events and the retreats, which again, our mission was to make this as accessible as possible, because there are a lot of amazing retreats and workshops and seminars out there, and they tend to be pretty pricey, and they're kind of geared towards like maybe executive level, just people that have that income that are able to go and do something like that. We wanted this to be accessible to more people at various stages of life. Again, that busy young father, husband that's hard pressed to just get time to go on a vacation with his family, let alone like a men's retreat, right?
Yeah.
And so we were like, let's make this really accessible as much as we can. And so the cost of our retreats was pretty low, but still we figured out how to make those profitable. And then the app felt like that was going to be the answer, which was this subscription idea that I already referenced. And just as we iterated on it, tested it, we kind of, in hindsight, I think we had the wrong value proposition initially, which was, hey, just come be a part of this community, and here's the subscription to be a part of the community. And we learned pretty quickly that men just didn't want to buy that or pay for that, especially if you didn't already have an inside look at what it was like and what it was all about. So at one point we became aware of this as we were testing things, and even some other people who are more experienced in this space kind of reinforced that message to us. They're like, that's a tough model, right? So we pivoted for a time and thought, well, what are we actually offering in this online community? And we were doing things like Monday morning mindset, like a live meditation experience to kick off your week on the right foot, to do that, take that time to set an intention, to connect, to breathe, and with your online community, with the Brotherhood. So that we were doing that on Mondays. Sometimes I would live stream breathwork meditations, and we had a global audience, and literally we'd have people from around the world tuning in to a breathwork session that was happening in Highland, Utah. And that was so cool. And afterwards they'd comment and say, oh, that was awesome or whatever. We were doing online group meets, kind of like men's circles where, if people are familiar with that, but it's kind of an opportunity to get together as a group. And usually there's a prompt of some kind, maybe something to reflect on. And then you just break into subgroups and you just start to talk and open up and share with each other. And that was so powerful because, again, with this global audience, we had guys from, I think in one meeting we had, I don't know if it was 7 or 8 different countries represented or something like that, all in different time zones, right? And everyone with different, it was just so cool when we broke into these subgroups, and then you're talking to people from around the world about your biggest struggles and problems, and then realizing that they all get it exactly the same. And they share something, you're like, I get that. And I'm going through the same kind of stuff, or I can relate with that, or I've been there, or I can just empathize, or whatever it is, right? That was such a powerful thing, just in my view of the world and of all of us as brothers and sisters on this planet, like how much of a shared experience it is, regardless of culture, upbringing, background, whatever, right? It was incredible. So we were doing those kinds of virtual meetups. And so we just took stock of like all the stuff that we're doing. How do we emphasize that? Like, that's the offering. It's not just to come be a part of this group. It's like, hey, we're doing meditation, we're doing breath work, we're doing these group meetups, weekly prayer. We have for those who choose to join in a Brotherhood prayer every Sunday, we would get on and have a weekly prayer. And it wasn't only the founders that would be the voice of the prayer. We would invite different people from different, religions, different backgrounds. Like, they would be their turn to say the prayer that week, and we'd get to see how they pray and that spirit of brotherhood. And we always would pray for everyone that was on that call by name. And we would also open it up to the community and say, hey, if you have a prayer request, let us know, and we'll include that in the weekly prayer. And so we'd get these requests like, oh, hey, my mom's going into surgery or whatever. And so we'd pray for these people with, things that are really happening in their lives, like specific. And there's such power in that. So we thought, we need to reposition what this is about and emphasize, because there's a lot of things out there that are like meditation apps, mindfulness apps, whatever. And we've got this additional thing of community that felt so powerful. And so that's how we most recently pivoted. And we hadn't actually put that fully to test, just because of some personal issues that came up with some of our founders. We've got one that's been going through a divorce, and some life events came up that slowed down our progress on repositioning and testing that, but that's very much kind of like our most recent iteration and where we've been at. So still to be determined, if that's the path forward or not.
No, that's interesting.
Yeah.
How big is your community?
So the app, we've got 7,000 members.
That's a ton.
Yeah, there's a lot. And majority are, kind of the Mountain West area.
Okay.
Like that's where the highest concentration of members are, but we've got members across the whole country. And then of course, across the world. I mean, there was a point when we established our mission statement, which was about being a global brotherhood. I think it was within a week, we looked at all the stats on our app and we had every habitable continent represented on the app. Africa and Europe, Asia. We had someone from South America. We had at least one member from each of those.
Yeah.
And we were holding out for Antarctica. That was the one. It was that period of explosive growth, which was both a blessing and a curse, right? So we got some amazing members on there. But then we had to kind of deal with some of the issues that I mentioned earlier. The other number that I refer to is how many people have signed the Brotherhood Oath, because that's separate. That's you can sign it on the app, but we have just on our website a page where it's like, if you support this, and it's open to men and women, women, we have many women supporters that are like, yes, we need more of this kind of thing. Right. And I think on that, the last I checked, we had about 15,000 people that have signed the oath.
That's awesome.
Which is pretty awesome. Yeah.
That's awesome.
So it's definitely a message that is resonating.
What do you think about the mental health of Utahns and men? And what have you experienced? I know that we've worked together on a couple of these things, or you've been part of some town halls and things that we've done around mental health in the tech community. But what is the state of men's mental health just in general? Yeah.
I mean, I don't claim to be an expert in the things that I'm about to share, but I can just share from my perspective. I think that it's always a combination of things, right? There's never just one thing that explains all, but a few that come to mind are, I think that men culturally, for whatever reasons in our society, have learned to suppress or ignore what's going on deep down inside, right? Emotions, feelings, desires. There's a big push in our culture, in our community, to stuff that down, to suppress it, to hide it. And then if we aren't dealing with those things in a healthy way, where does that lead? If we're not feeling connected to ourselves in an authentic way with an open heart, where does that lead us? We get into those addictive behaviors of escaping and numbing out and avoiding. And then occasionally we'll get provoked enough that an outburst will happen. And that's where the anger shows up, or or you just suppressed until you get depressed. I think there's so much around our mental health that is just due to the expectations of men in society, the pressures, the obligations, and then the inability or the lack of permission to really, in a healthy way, process those things. I think we're uneducated in emotional intelligence and emotional wellness. I think that's another factor. And there are just these external pressures of like, nobody wants to see that. Nobody wants to see a man express his emotions. No one wants to see a man cry, right? Brene Brown talks about this stuff, right? With her observations around men and this idea of shame. And so often shame is at the root of a lot of these issues that I think we feel. And the problem with shame is that men feel it most if they feel weak, if they're perceived as being weak. Well, expressing emotion is often conflated with weakness, which is false. But I think so many of us believe that it's true, because if somebody cries, that means weakness, right? In our experience with the work that we're doing and with this brotherhood, time after time, every time I see a man step into vulnerability, like true vulnerability, it's something that is admirable. It's not weakness, it's strength. That ability to be so open and raw and honest and real. I think we have it backwards, and so often we see like, wow, that was incredible. And I respect the people that have the courage to do that. And that's one of the reasons I think that this brotherhood has grown in the way that it has, and the examples of the people who have started it, by being really willing to step into vulnerability in public spaces, like on LinkedIn, tell the story, talk about what's really going on. And people rallied around that. I mean, when Justin shared his story of almost ending his life and very publicly shared that experience, he just talks about the influx of people that reached out to him after posting that. And that was one of his posts that just like kind of went viral, right? And just so many people reached out and said, thank you for sharing this. Thank you for making this more normal to talk about, like when we're struggling or our dark times or I'm going through this right now. It gave people the opportunity to open up in a way by seeing it modeled and by creating that safe environment, that safe space. It was just incredible. So I was a little all over the place on some different factors there, but I think that if I were try to recap a little bit of what are the different factors, I think one is that pressure that we all feel to perform and support and get it right and succeed, combined with the not feeling like it's safe to talk about the struggles, and not just the struggles that are okay to talk about, right? But like the deep, real vulnerable stuff, and having the environments or the spaces where it's okay to do that. Because I don't think vulnerability all the time everywhere is the answer. I think there are times and places. And Justin, he stepped into the public forum of LinkedIn and shared his story. And I applaud that he was, courageous enough to do that. For me, that hasn't been what I felt called to do. I do open up about some of my very personal struggles in different settings, in different containers. And that's just what feels good to me, like what feels right for me. But I didn't have a lot of those spaces or containers prior to the work that we're doing now. It just didn't exist. And so I was bottling that up most of the time. I think normalizing things like therapy and men's retreats and women's retreats and all this kind of couples, all the things that we are trying to work on, I think it's not going to solve all the problems, but my hope is that it is a step in the right direction to address some of these issues.
How did you come up with the name?
Which one?
HEARE.
Oh, so HEARE, that was John Moore's name that he came up with, but it started with, he was thinking of like British Parliament, like here, like we're going to pound the table and rally around like this movement, right? But the combination of, because the spelling is HEARE. So it's, I'm here, I'm present, I'm with you, and I hear you, I'm listening. And so for a few reasons, that's where he ended up with the name.
Great.
Yeah.
What about the other one?
The Light in Us. That one, it refers to the light of Christ that is in each of us and that we each have access to, and that light within us. And the night sky has been kind of a point of reference and inspiration of all of those points of light in the sky as kind of a reflection of us. And some of the experiences that my wife and I have had in our spiritual development, our spiritual growth, it has literally felt like light within the heart that shines, like the kind, not like the light that's not heavy, right? It's like the kind of light that shines. And that was just such a beautiful sensation to feel in some of these profound spiritual experiences that it just resonated when it came to the name of the light in us. And so it's both our inner light and our connection to the divine.
So if somebody wanted to get involved with either of these or both of these, how would they do it?
Yeah. For the Light in Us, we have a website up that's just called thelightinus.org. We have an Instagram up, and we have a podcast that we just started. And the podcast is again, a little more tailored to like the LDS audience and talks about those things. But also with that expansive view.
Yeah, that's super cool, actually.
Thanks. Yeah. We just did an episode where my wife shared about her yoga training experience and some of the connections that she saw with with our view on religion and spirituality. We, for the HEARE Brotherhood, also have a website. It's called HEAREBros.com, HEAREBROS.com. We do have the app that's under Mighty Networks as it used to be our own branded app, but now it's back to the Mighty Networks app, but you can find our community within that. And we also have a podcast called the HEARE Brotherhood podcast. Had some incredible guests on talking all about this concept of men's work and mental health and how do we just do better, right?
You've done those here, haven't you?
Yeah, we did a few episodes here.
Here. I was going to say, I remember you coming in. Well, thank you so much for everything you're doing. Seriously.
I appreciate
You're
that.
making a difference in the world. It's incredible what you've built. And I encourage people to check out what you're doing because I think it's incredible and it's probably life-changing. So thanks for talking to us about it.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it.